Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Steven. This is Northwest Small Batch Brewing, and if I'm eyeing the camera a little bit during this video, it's because I already recorded this whole thing and I have to redo it because the camera magnet I have on it that holds it in place keeps failing. So I have it super glued and I'm hoping it's sat there and dried long enough that it won't fall or start drooping during the video. So we'll see. Hey, before I get started on today's video, if you want to get reminded when I put out my next video and you want to help promote my channel, please consider becoming a subscriber. Just click the link below. So let's get going. Yeast Nutrient, my friends. So what is it? Do we need it? How much do we need if we do need it? When do you add it? Let's get into that. So first of all, what is yeast nutrient, or why do we need it? Well, I mean, it's basically like a multivitamin for your yeast, right? So normally you don't need it. If you're just making a standard beer, you don't need it because wort has all the minerals and vitamins and nutrients that yeast really need. However, if you start putting adjuncts, right, extra stuff, especially simple sugars, into your beer, now you need to start thinking about yeast nutrient because there is no nutrients in all those adjuncts, and that starts to affect the yeast. It stresses the yeast out. It creates off flavors. You don't want that. So if you're making a high gravity beer, and of course that's a buzzword, right? What is high gravity? Well, it depends on who you ask. For me, I feel like anything above 7% could be considered a high gravity beer. And I just went to ABV, right? So now I'm speaking apples and oranges, but you get the point, right? And it really is nothing written in stone. So, but the higher the alcohol content, the more you do need to use yeast nutrient so that you can help your yeast get every chance of being happy and healthy. If you're adding something like, if you're making a cider, for example, or wine, you absolutely need yeast nutrient because there's nothing in there except for simple sugars, and your yeast will just create a bunch of off flavors. So you got to make sure that you're making a nice environment for the yeast. So let's talk about what kind of yeast nutrients is out there. There's a whole bunch. I'm only going to talk about 3 of the main ones, but you will find there are different brands and companies that, basically it's all the same stuff, but they're putting their own name on it or whatever and trying to claim that it's different. So the first one you're going to hear, and it's been around forever, is something called diammonium phosphate, or DAP, DAP. This is simply nitrogen, right? Yeast needs nitrogen. The problem with this particular item being used as a yeast nutrient is it's kind of like Red Bull for your yeast, right? It gives it wings. It's a huge boost of like energy, right, for your yeast, and then it dies off quickly. So it's not sustained. It doesn't really, it's just a quick punch in the gut, right? So I bought this giant bag of it a long time ago, and it just takes forever to get through it. But it's not the best thing to use by itself. I mean, it's better than nothing, but you want something that maybe will stretch it out, right? So there are 2 other options here. Both of them are by the same company called Fermade. Fermade. One of them is Fermade O, and the other one is Fermade K. One of them has this aforementioned diammonium sulfate as part of the ingredients, right? That is the Fermade K. It has both like dead yeast cells and that DAP ingredient in there. So it contributes to both, and that is my favorite yeast ingredient or yeast, food to use because it does have both of those 2 things in it. Fermade O does not have the diammonium sulfate or phosphate in it. It only has like the dead yeast cells, which is fine. But or if you happen to have some DAP set aside, you could get Fermade O and then combine the 2 so that you have the best of both worlds. Either way, those are the 3 main sort of types of yeast nutrient. Now, the Fermade O or the Fermade K is going to be more sustained over a longer period of time. The question is, how much do you add? This is another difficult question to answer because depending on where you look, you're going to get different answers. You can Google it and there'll be calculators, but it seems like every calculator and every piece of information out there gives you something different as far as the amount to use. So I would recommend that what I do, follow the directions on the packet. You figure the company that made it will give you the best, information on how much to use. So do that. Like, for example, the diammonium phosphate that I have, I think it says to use 1 teaspoon per gallon. And that's what it says right on the package. So that's what, I would do. When to use it. This one's also debatable. So here's the problem. You could put your yeast nutrient, like I tend to put it in the last 5 minutes of my boil. So it gets all, mixed in nicely throughout the wort. The problem is that your yeast might use that up pretty quickly right at the beginning, and then it has nothing. So there are some people that say put a little bit in the boil at the end of the boil, put a little bit after the first day, put a little bit after the second day, put a little bit after the third day, right? Because the most critical time is during the primary fermentation, when the yeast is growing a colony, it's super active. And so one can say that maybe it would be a good idea to add yeast nutrient over the first 2 to 3 days as well. If you do that, I would recommend mixing the yeast nutrient with a little bit of like distilled water, or especially if you can get it from the store. It's more like you're not going to have any bugs and things, no chlorine in it. But if you can warm it up a little bit, it just will help it mix into your wort. Well, like at this point, it would be beer. Because if you just toss in the powder, I feel like it would not mix in it, especially if there's a lot of krausen. It's going to be hard to get it to actually, mix in. Or just put it in during the boil and see how it works for you. If you start seeing some off flavors, especially on the higher gravity beers, you might want to consider staging it out. So that's yeast nutrient in a nutshell. You don't always have to use it. It depends on what you're making. And I think it's a good thing to have around. I think it helps. At any rate, I hope that was informative. If you had questions about yeast nutrient, I will be putting on another video soon. So make sure you do subscribe. And as always, stay cool during this hot summer. Happy brewing.